What are you always talking about so much, Paul? I mean, I'm always here.
Debatable. It's debatable whether you're always here or not, right?
I had a good excuse this time, though. On that note, there is a non-zero chance that there is a housekeeping coming into my hotel room while we do this. So let's see. That's going to be a fun blooper.
Did you put the blocker up on the door?
Yes,
not
but
disturb.
They don't care about this in Africa.
As long as it's not some half-naked person. Yeah.
You never know.
Like that famous news reporter who had his daughter come in, right?
Yep. Yep. We've had that.
Fantastic. Does your husband come in the same way?
That was actually me.
Excellent. All right. So in that case, Sarah, are you ready to go?
Sure.
Yeah.
Do I look okay? I assume so.
Yeah, you look perfect, as always. Ville, are you ready to go?
Always.
Okay, in that case, a clap and we'll get going.
Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Pål Krogdahl and Ville Sointu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
We're back. Another fantastic episode of Fintech Daydreaming, your favorite podcast for news around banking technology and fintech. And this time we're going to dive deep into the world of open banking. We like platforms, open banking, embedded finance, all of these cool things that are happening at the moment in the banking industry. So we're going to dive into that again. And this time we're going to focus in on a specific area around open banking and possibly look at what is some of the secret sauce in making success and making failures of open banking. But as always, I could not do this without my partner in fintech. We have already decided we won't use partner in crime anymore, but my good friend, Ville Sointu. How are you, my friend? You're traveling again, right?
Yes, I'm doing good. I'm actually here in Rwanda, Africa, right now in Kigali for the Mobile World Congress Africa. So it's a really fascinating place to be in. And as we all know, Africa is the home for mobile money. And we just heard from GSMA yesterday that there's over $1 trillion worth of payments going through mobile money solutions globally every year. And the growth is continuing this year. So it's definitely making an impact. And I think it actually has an interesting connection to the topic we have today on open banking, because these systems for mobile money have been built from the ground up to be API based and ecosystem enabled. All of these mobile money providers have hundreds, if not thousands, of partners integrated into the mobile money platforms. So it's an interesting comparison between the European PSD2 driven open banking setup compared to this mobile money space. But we digress. I think we need to get on to the guest of today.
Yes, we do indeed. We do indeed. And with us today, we've got Sarah Häger, who up until very recently was responsible for the successful sort of domain of community within sort of open banking at Nordea. But you've moved on since then. But maybe for our listeners, for the few who don't know about you and Nordea, why don't you just give a little bit of a background of who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. So Sarah Häger, I was 15 years in Nordea before I decided to leave the bank. Never thought I would be that long in one company, ever. Started in Gothenburg, always been working with large corporate clients, working in Stockholm, working in Frankfurt with the European subsidiaries or the Euro country-based subsidiaries, then back to Sweden. And then in product management, I got an opportunity to join open banking 6 years ago, just when it was founded and started and kicked off based on a payment strategy that Nordea had launched back then. So since then, I've been working to get that vision of ours from PowerPoint into the reality of today, with several different APIs, commercial APIs, partner APIs, PSD2 APIs, PSD2 approved APIs by the FinFSA, and now also, just before I left, launching internal and domain APIs.
Fantastic. And you're also missing out the important part here. I mean, your role focused around driving the community around Nordea's open banking success. And I think we shouldn't be shy about this. Nordea was for a long time, and to a certain degree still is, seen as a benchmark for open banking in Europe, if not globally. And a lot of that came down to the success of how you and the team drove that whole community ethos around the open banking platform and the open banking organization within inside of Nordea. But we digress. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So I think one of the things that's interesting is you recently left Nordea. Yes. Went to work for a fintech. There's always these questions of why would you leave such a big established bank in a key role that you were in to go and play in the world of fintech. So I mean, we love it.
Why indeed?
It's a question I got asked so often, so I decided to write a blog post about it. Both that question of why do you leave Nordea, why do you leave that management position, and also the second question to why enable banking. We've never heard about enable banking before, and the first question is. In my world, it's super simple. I've been with the bank for 15 years. I've seen how it's been developing. I've seen how the banks are being burdened by a large regulatory burden, and how all the commercial initiatives have been restrained, down prioritized due to the need and the must of compliance. Because the bank's priority list is, of course, number 1, 2, and 3 is compliance, compliance, compliance. Now, in open banking, we were fairly successful in turning compliance into commercial solutions. But I would still say that that's one of the things that I really missed in Nordea, the possibility to innovate and to enable innovation. And having been a leader for a good while, I think it's a bit like being a parent after a few years. You get to be proud about your people, or you're proud about your children. In that sense, I found enable banking fantastic, because I can be proud of what other people are building on top of our APIs, enabling success, enabling others to really succeed and to let them build. In the role that I have right now, I have a very free role where I'm able to inspire and to share the knowledge and to share all that cool use cases that we were working on or tried to start to get to work on in the bank previously. For less than a month ago, by 1st of October, I started with Enable Banking. It's a fintech in its simplest sort, in its simplest form. And Enable Banking is originally a Finnish company. And it's regulated under the Finnish FSA. It's a TPP, regulated for account information services, soon to be payment initiation services. And what I really liked about Enable Banking is that they never store any data. They never use any data, and they will never package or resell or clean or scrub or innovate with any of the data of our customers. And that builds for integrity, it builds for security, it builds for a sustainable business model in the long term. And I also strongly believe when it comes to data that it's not like friendship or happiness, that it's when you share it with someone, it grows. In this case, it's rather the other way around, where if you share data with someone, the value of that data is diminishing. And the second part is that we always want to stay enabling other companies. If we find a lucrative niche, or a customer finds a super lucrative niche, we will not start competing with them, like we've seen several other third parties done in the market. We will always stay at enabling them. working as that true enabler in the industry. And one of the personal missions of Jonas is to become a kind of standard when it comes to the aggregated APIs, so that kind of API and that kind of standard is more uniform than what it is right now, with all the different standards from the banks and the difference in how they have been interpreting that in some sense, in some parts, vague regulation.
Okay. Fantastic. I think we're having a small amount of bandwidth problems here, so we have to apologize to our viewers and listeners, but bear with us. This is technology as always, right? Sometimes these things happen, and it's almost live. So let's keep going with it.
Paul, can I pick up on something Sarah just said?
Yeah, because I want to pick up on something as well. So you go first, and I'll go second.
So I found it interesting that, Sarah, that you mentioned that enable banking is one of the first unique value propositions that you mentioned was that you don't store the data, you don't touch the data as an aggregator. Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned it so high on the list, are you implying that other aggregators are doing such things, or?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. We have seen how several actors have been utilizing the data of their customers' Absolutely.
That's a standard industry practice, and I think that's actually a pretty good value proposition if you point that out to the customers, for sure.
No,
I believe that transparency is super important when you use these kind of services, because it's about your bank account and it's about your entire financial situation. And as a user of open banking services, you should be knowledgeable, and you should be understanding how your data is being used, and most importantly, by whom.
Which, if we're honest, GDPR to a certain degree as a regulation is trying to enforce that visibility, and it helping consumers to a certain degree to understand where their data is being used. But at the same time, the transparency isn't really there. Now, if we look at how GDPR is implemented, it's not as if we get a dashboard that tells us your data is being used in these places for these reasons. You still have to do some digging, even as an individual, to understand what's happening with your data. But I was also interested in your statement that sharing your data actually diminishes its value, because I sometimes tend to think that sharing your data to be able to enrich your data actually gives your data more value. If you keep your data to yourself and don't share it in any way, there is limited value in that data to grow, right?
But that's in the terms of, then you need innovation by combination, combining two different data sources in order to make it more valuable.
Yeah.
It's not the same set of data that you then divide by two or copy.
That's very true. That's very true. I actually want to go back to one of the statements you made at the beginning there, and then we'll get into the whole community aspects of open banking. But you highlighted quite strongly regulation and the banks being, focused on regulation. And this as well is we see this as a repeated discussion where it's being said that the banks will die because they are so focused on regulation, and all the fintechs and neobanks are able to be so much more nimble, etc., because apparently they don't need to follow the regulations. But at the same time, at the end of the day, everybody in this industry, at one way or another, gets hit by the regulations and have to follow the regulations. But do you feel, having sat inside of Nordea, that one of the things that's hindering the banks from being successful around open banking is the regulations?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a super lucrative commercial initiative and then at the same hand you have a regulatory initiative, but there is a limited amount of funds, which one do you need to prioritize?
So that's an interesting dichotomy almost there, because what you're pointing out to is more around the business model and the funding model from the priorities perspective, rather than the actual regulations being a throttling effect on the banks. It is more about how they disperse their budgets and prioritize their projects, right?
Have to prioritize their projects.
Yes. Okay, no, very interesting. I mean, Ville, you also used to work in this fantastic large blue labeled bank in the Nordics. Did you have the same sort of feeling when you were head of emerging technologies? So same sort of area of innovation and cool stuff.
Yeah, so 150%. So it was always compliance, compliance, compliance. I sometimes felt like maybe it's easier to actually advocate for new regulation for the thing you want to do, and then becoming law, and then you get to comply on it. So that would be faster than getting an innovation budget for something that would actually be meaningful in terms of return on investment. But I mean, in defense of the banks, of course, I mean they do have a limited IT budget, and compliance is expensive. So of course, compliance becomes first, and then you need to spend that money effectively on compliance. But the question becomes, if you do have to spend that much on compliance, is there something you should do to make complying more efficient and faster, or is this really about, you know? It always reminds me of the cartoon where somebody is trying to pull a cart with square wheels, and then somebody comes with a round wheel, and they say, no, we don't have any time to change the wheels on this cart. So that's the usual analogy that comes to mind when talking about compliance and IT work in banks. So yes, totally relatable.
Okay,
compliance. I give you a second option on driving a regulation instead, Ville. Find a way to commercialize the compliance initiative.
Yeah, that's the way we did it with open banking for sure. So that's a good one.
So yes, open banking, compliance, regulations, PSD2, it all drove us towards open banking. And I think we've seen some fantastically interesting journeys by banks in both regulated regions where PSD2 has been mandated, and also in market-driven areas where, you know, like in the US and other areas where banks have seen potential opportunity in building open banking capabilities and externalizing APIs, externalizing banking services, and also in some cases data to third parties to be able to drive new business value, new engagement, and more importantly for most banks, drive new revenue streams. But I think we could all agree that the whole notion of build it and they will come has been a big failure for a lot of the banks. They've engaged into this, said it's very easy for us to take an IT project, externalize some APIs, and have an assumption that we're going to be able to generate an awful lot of return on investment on this. And reality is that it has not been the case. And I think, Sarah, we collaborated quite a bit at the early days with Nordea around open banking. And I think one of the things that have been a big winner for Nordea under your leadership was the outreach and the community capabilities. I wonder if you could just spend a little bit of time talking about that journey, the importance that the community focus had on the growth and success of Nordea Open Banking, and how you engaged in that for success.
We had a very, I mean, you always say fail fast, and then you learn again, and then you try again and do it in new ways. In the beginning, we decided internally that Finland would be the easiest country to get out the first APIs in. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we lacked the community perspective in that sense, because when we launched it, there was not a single TPP that was regulated by or approved by the Finnish FSA when the first APIs were launched. So it was impossible to test them and give feedback and to learn. So then we quickly changed that scope to start with Sweden instead, and to start building the Swedish APIs. And when we came closer to that one, I have another fond memory of that one with you, Pål, because what we did then was to establish a big release party in Stockholm.
Yes.
Where we invited all the TPPs, and we made sure to do a lot of buzz around it to make focus on the APIs. That, hey, now there's actually a bank out there who's launching APIs in Stockholm or in Sweden, and we're open to feedback. The openness to feedback and the openness to learn was something that we needed from the beginning, because when the open banking project was started the first time, fascinating part was that when we looked for people internally who'd ever been building external APIs before, guess how many people we found?
Zero.
Zero. So what do you do then? You need to find people who have done this before. You need to look at industries that have done this before and understand what is happening, what are they doing that is working, what can we apply into our business model. We know there's been a lot of other companies and industries and verticals who's been doing this before. So initially a lot of focus on the attention, getting the attention from the TPPs and also listening to them. I mean, we got a lot of crazy questions back then, and they were they expected everything to be included in the PSD2 APIs, even in the version 1.0 of the API. And that's of course not matching their realities. So there was a lot of struggle there in some of the dialogues in aligning expectations with them and what they can expect from a bank.
Sorry, go on, keep going. I apologize.
But the attention was super important, that we got the TPP's attention and then also listening to them. Although that was super hard many times because I've had some experience that I would have wished that I didn't have. But also I mean, in the long term, it's all about the learnings. What can we learn from them? We have to be, although we are a bank and we've been a bank for more than 100 years, we have to be humble and understand that we can learn something from the community as well. So we started bringing in initiatives and adding things to the developer portal, for example, that came as proposals from the fintechs.
So would you say that you engaged predominantly with an outside-in mentality and mindset, seeing the ecosystem and wider community as being an integral part of your development process going forwards?
Absolutely. Always listening to the users, seeing where are their priorities right now, because as a bank, you can't do it all at one time. And especially as shortly before the deadline, the scope grew immensely on the bank side, going from only including the most common payment types into including all payment types. So then it was impossible for the banks to be prepared and be ready by the due date. So then you have to prioritize, and you better be smart and prioritize according to what your users want and need.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes communities are difficult to get started, and you need to feed them to be able to keep the community growing and keep the community active, almost giving some element of stickiness to it. What was the approach that you used to drive success, to keep the community active and engaged?
Listening to the users, whether it's a TPP or if it's a partner or if it's a corporate customer, listening to them, understanding their needs, and then starting to inspire and also to influence how they are thinking, what are their priorities. I mean, in the large corporate segment, nothing happens overnight, but it certainly has been possible. And we see a huge difference to the matureness of the large corporates now in comparison to when we started in the beginning.
I'm sure the developer communities are quite different from social media communities, but did you see any kind of a negative behavior in the community once you got it started? Was there some type of negative elements in the feedback comments or anything like that in there?
Oh, we got a lot of negative feedback. Then it's about understanding how can we understand or make this constructive feedback so that we understand what do we need to do to make it better. But I've had, and this is on the kind of feedback sessions, I've had a very prominent fintech in Sweden, and one of their managers screaming at me over the digital meeting and saying that, how can you go out and be so loud about that you're great when you're crappy? You're absolutely disastrous.
Oh my.
And then listening to that for half an hour, continuous times, and then trying to understand, okay, he's furious, probably not with me. because later on I saw he had a baby, so he probably had some sleepless nights behind him. But understanding what is it that he actually wants. So everything from that into the fantastic feedback that we've gotten, where people were super happy with what we had delivered and saying this works, like the dynamic sandbox. We've got a lot of praise on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we can always think that even negative feedback, even like this passionate negative feedback that you got back then, means that they care. It's always better to get negative feedback than no feedback at all, because that would be the absolute worst, because that means that nobody cares what you're doing. So yeah, there's always a silver lining even for these cases.
Would you say that the sort of whole community focus was one of the key driving forces for the success of the open banking agenda at Nordea?
It was a part of it, absolutely. And I mean, the community, in my way, it was not only about the direct users, the technical users. We also included it into making sure that we were able to inspire the large corporates and the treasurers, so very much the business people, understand, or creating an understanding among them that APIs is something that even a business person needs to understand and to work with, and to see what are the benefits out of the solution. But also doing a lot of evangelizing in the beginning of setting up the open banking project internally, in order to make sure that the other departments in the bank are starting to understand this. And we've seen a lot of different departments, especially Nordea, who's been putting out their own kind of APIs, but also partners. We have a public case of Finnair, which was actually built in the sandbox. So Finnair and Nordea co-created that case in the sandbox together, which I think is a super cool example of how we can inspire a large corporate into looking at APIs and to see, hey, can we do something cool around this together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And now that you're sitting on the other side of the fence as a fintech here in the Nordics, are you seeing the need for change? Are you know, what's your reaction now from the community perspective on the other side?
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think wow in terms of how broad the spectrum is of how different banks are performing in this.
Yeah.
I've been experiencing it personally when I've been trying to set up open banking for a company and a company account of mine. Super strange experience, and I had to change bank in the end. Super fascinating that banks are not taking this seriously, because they are going to lose business if they are not joining this, and if they are not moving towards open APIs.
Yes.
I had a seminar just before summer where we had a bit more than 200 treasurers sitting and listening to how another company had been building their APIs and publishing their APIs and have been utilizing the bank's APIs. I think there are a lot of banks that will be missing out on a lot of business going forward unless they take the step into the API economy.
Go on, Ville.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that that you're on the other side of the fence. Do you think any specific bank is doing a really great job with the community and engagement in general, outside of Nordea, of course? I mean, what's your experience overall? How the banks are doing?
There are a few banks that I really liked what they're doing, and that's BBVA, ABN AMRO, Raiffeisen, and Deutsche. I think they're really good in listening to their users and then getting the things out what the users will want.
Yeah.
Are they the exceptions, or are they? Is that this norm, or that it's getting better, or is it still bad?
I think they are the front runners in this understanding, and I think they will be the banks the banks that will be having a good standing going forward, because they've clearly understood the advantage of APIs. And when you see, I mean, it's a bit like what you see in front of the curtain and what you see behind the curtain. But what you see in front of the curtain implies that they've also really understood it and is utilizing this technology and the technology shift behind the curtains.
I'd like to sort of continue a little bit on this, the other banks, etc. I'm still seeing an awful lot of banks that are struggling with how they can transition from a fundamentally technology-enabled project for open banking to a business-driven agenda. And I think community, again, comes in as being something very important here. So what would be your recommendations to these banks that are struggling in trying to make that transition? What should they be doing? What should be their starting steps in building this community mentality and listening to their users and external ecosystem?
I mean, if I take the experience that we did with Nordea in really listening to the TPPs and the fintechs, and then taking all that knowledge, and then we did it with the corporates, so did it for the corporates. I think that was a brilliant way of doing it, listening to the people who knows what it means to build open APIs, listening to the people who are building open and commercial APIs themselves. I know we back then, I had a lot of dialogues with also your community people at IBM. Yes. So listening, understanding, how are the technology companies doing this? What can we adapt from that? What are the segments such as telecom or such as aviation and travel industry? What are they doing on the API side, and how are they working with their customers?
Yeah. How did you, using the community, how did you find new use cases or new ideas to drive expansion of the open banking platform? I mean, very often banks get stuck in identifying where they can drive value to be able to get their return on investment. I'm assuming that dialogue with the community helped to identify new use cases or opportunities.
Absolutely. I think I've been a pain in the X for several people in the bank when I've been forwarding different use cases that I've seen in either in other banks or in other industries that I think are relatable, but also could be valuable for the people in charge to have a look at. So a lot of spreading relevant information to the people who would need it or who would profit from it. Yeah. And then again, listen to the users.
Fantastic. No, I absolutely think that the future, I mean, we've said this so many times, Ville, on the podcast, the future of banking is going to be dominated by platforms. And open banking, embedded finance, open APIs, it's all part of that journey going forwards. And it will require the banks to make fundamental changes in their business models, their strategies moving forwards. And I absolutely think, community is a fundamental part of that. And what Nordea did with a community focus, I think is a good benchmark for a lot of other banks to follow going forwards. I'm wondering, Sarah, is there anything else that you think would be critical to share with our listener community around this that you feel we haven't covered so far?
No. I'd like to go back to what you started with. Don't expect to build it and they will come. Listen to the users and figure out what will the users want, and then collaborate with them, because most users or most corporates in this sense would want to have an impact in what is being built for them. And the sooner you can, classical, fail fast, the sooner you can realize and then either pivot on what you need to do instead, then the sooner the better. So continuous dialogues bilateral dialogues with your customer base and understanding where are they going, what are their main challenges, and then also the visionary approach of how can you exceed those expectations. Is there something you can pick up from another industry? Is there something that we can learn from other verticals, looking broader than banking?
Now, this has been a fantastic discussion. I'm pretty sure that a lot of our listeners have learned an awful lot out of this, particularly around the community and the need to drive community. We like to Ville likes to do it at the beginning of the shows. I like to do it at the end. I always like to add some element of humor and humanity to our shows. Humor and humanity to our shows. And we like to ask our guests if they've got a fun story or joke they'd like to share. I'm wondering if you've got maybe something to lighten our day today.
I think I have a very good one.
Okay.
During the PSD2 projects back in Nordea, then there were I've already stated it's a lot about competing priorities. And even sometimes within compliance, it's a compliance initiative competing with another compliance initiative. And one of the very different parts around PSD2 is that the output of this compliance regulation and the performance of the bank is actually visible for the third parties.
Yes.
So it's not a regulation it's not visible for someone on the outside how the bank is doing with whichever regulation. But this is super transparent. And that calls for tough prioritization sometimes in the bank, and then also explaining this part in how it's super visible and how everyone can see how we are doing right now. So we had a lot of preparations for high management sessions, and we've been creating document after document, and we've had I would say a fairly good process in how to create those and to make sure that there are no errors in them.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes a typo is popping up. So we are with the direct reports of the CEO, Frank, presenting what needs to be done and how the bank needs to reprioritize in between their projects. And in the first sentence of that document, it doesn't say open banking, but when you write it in a local Scandinavian language, banking, then you get bangers. So suddenly we were writing about how the open bankers would need to get prioritization.
So did that get in front of the GLT already?
Yes.
Wow.
It got in the front of the GLT on the screen, but super professionally, one of them simply kindly pointed out, I think there is an error in the first paragraph.
So the important thing with those events is, you've made it if it becomes the new term used going forwards. Did it get adopted as the new internal name?
I don't know if we were seen as the open bangers from that, but it certainly got, after a while, when all this shock calmed down on our side, then it certainly became a good joke on our side as well.
And I have to mention, by the way, we mentioned the acronym GLT, which is, of course, Nordea lingo. It's the group leadership team. So it was the very high executives of the bank, for listeners not familiar with the Nordea acronyms.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
Pretty funny.
I like that. Fantastic. Well, Sarah, it's been a fantastically insightful discussion. It's been a pleasure having you with us here on this podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure is on my side.
No, fantastic. And as always, to all of our listeners, thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for following us. Thank you for listening to us on a fortnightly basis as we bring out new points for discussion, new guests, and we will continue to do so. But we appreciate the feedback that we get from you guys. It helps us to see the growth. So please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave us a comment, a little bit like we've just discussed here in the this episode, from a community perspective, no comments is actually worse than bad comments. No comments maybe makes us feel like you don't care, and we want you to care. We want you to take an interest in what we bring and what we talk about. So leave us those comments. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you would like us to cover in the future. Ville and I will be back in 2 weeks' time, unless Ville decides to stay in Africa, become a nomad, and move around in the desert there. Otherwise, we will have a guest with us in 2 weeks' time. Until then, this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.